and here we are for another video. As I've mentioned in my last few videos, I, as an American in the American school system, have learned so much in the last few years that I never learned in school, especially when it comes to Black history. So far we've talked about Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Race Massacre, the inventor who changed our lives with his most famous invention of refrigeration, Frederick Jones, and the 1980 move bombing on a residential house in Philadelphia. Today we talk about Maya Angelou. She was a poet, author, and a civil rights activist. Reading one of her books, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, had one of the biggest impacts on my perspective and on my journey in educating myself. Let's get started talking about this amazing woman. Maya Angelou was born Marguerite Johnson on April 4th, 1928, to Vivian and Bailey Johnson in St. Louis, Missouri. Her parents ended up splitting when she was 3 years old. At the time, her and her 4-year-old brother were sent to live with their paternal grandmother, Annie Henderson. They took the long train ride to Stamps, Arkansas, solo. Their grandmother, Annie, whom they start to refer to as Mama, was actually a bit better off than others in the community because of the general store she owned. It was a focal point in the segregated Black community, and as such, Mama was one of the most well-respected members of their community. Despite this, she, Maya, and her brother Bailey were just as subject to racial prejudice and discrimination as the rest of the Black community. It's noted in her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, that by the age of only 5 or 6, Maya had started equating beauty with whiteness. She was ridiculed for the way she looked with her dark skin and kinky hair, and she recalls hoping to one day wake up as a beautiful blonde white girl. This messed up idea of equating normalcy or beauty to whiteness or white features has always run deep, not only in the minds of people, but in workplaces, industries, and products as well. Maya wasn't alone with this unfortunate train of thought, and I can't imagine how much of a toll this idea takes on men, women, and especially young girls and boys who feel they have to look a certain way or dress a certain way in order to fit in. Maya and Bailey remained here until Maya was 7 years old, and then they were whisked back to live with their mother in St. Louis. Maya writes about when her father, Big Bailey, showed up to Stamps in the car that he owned with his tall frame and beautiful features, and she could only see him as a stranger, not as her father. Big Bailey is the one who ended up returning the children to their mother, Vivian. Something that really got to me when reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is her sense of displacement throughout her childhood, which makes perfect sense considering how much she was moved around. How could you feel at home in any one place when your home would so drastically change? She went from St. Louis with her parents to Stamps with her paternal grandmother, back to St. Louis for 6 months with her maternal grandmother, and then finally back with their mother, all by age 7. Not long after moving in with their mother, when she was only 7 or 8 years old, she started to be sexually assaulted by her mother's boyfriend, Mr. Freeman. After a repeated cycle of assault and then ignoring her for weeks, he one day rapes Maya. Maya told her brother Bailey, who in turn told the family. Although Freeman was found guilty, he only spent 1 day in jail. He was murdered only 4 days after his release from jail, and it was likely done as an act of vengeance by Maya's uncles. His murder had a profound impact on Maya. She became mute for almost 5 years, and it is said during this time is when her love for books and literature really took off. She spoke about the event and her subsequent reaction by saying, "I thought my voice killed him. I killed that man because I told his name. And then I thought I would never speak again because my voice would kill anyone." After what happened to her, Maya and Bailey again went to live with their grandmother Annie in Stamps, Arkansas. It wasn't until she was 13 that she was eventually persuaded by Bertha Flowers, who was a teacher and family friend, to start speaking again. Bertha introduced her to the great writers of the past and present and told her that poetry, which was her passion, needed to be spoken aloud in order to fully be loved. When she was 15, Maya and Bailey again went to live with their mother. This time they were not alone, as Mama came and stayed with them for 6 months while they got acclimated to their new surroundings. Not long after moving back, their mother married a wealthy businessman by the name of Daddy Clydell, and the whole family then moved to San Francisco. In San Francisco, Maya won a scholarship to study dance and acting at the California Labor School. Around this time, her memoir tells the story of a time when Maya went to visit her father, Big Bailey, and his betrothed, Dolores. The tension is high between Dolores and Maya, and things finally come to a head when Dolores stabs Maya with scissors. After this, Maya heads out on her own instead of immediately returning to her mother. She recounts the time she spent a month living in the junkyard with a group of homeless kids. During this time, she learned to appreciate diversity and tolerance in a way that would stay with her throughout her life. After returning home, Maya also, at age 16, became the first black female cable car conductor. During her senior year of school, she became pregnant and gave birth shortly after finishing to a baby boy named Clyde. For the next several years, Maya jumped from job to job, city to city, and relationship to relationship as a single mother trying to support her son and figure herself out on the way. In 1951, she married Tosh Angelos and began taking modern dance classes. She even formed a dance team with the famed Alvin Ailey. Her marriage to Tosh ended in 1954, and after this, her performing career took off. She was dancing and singing around clubs in San Francisco, and then toured with the production of Porgy and Bess in 1954 and 1955. She toured 22 countries around Europe and Africa, and her love for learning languages began. In 1957, she released her one and only studio album, Miss Calypso. In 1959, her and her son moved back to New York City, where she joined the Harlem Writers Guild. She was now an active and effective civil rights activist. In 1961, her and her son again moved, but this time to Cairo. Shortly after was Ghana. It was here that her son, now going by Guy, was seriously injured, so they remained here until 1964. During this time, she held a position at the University of Ghana. She also became close with Malcolm X. When she returned to the States in 1964, she helped Malcolm X set up the Organization of Afro-American Unity. It would be less than a year later that Malcolm X was assassinated, and Maya was off again, this time to Hawaii. Tragedy would strike again only a few years later when, after asking Maya to organize a march, her friend Martin Luther King Jr. was also assassinated on April 4, 1968. He was killed on her birthday, and this absolutely devastated her. She wouldn't even celebrate her birthday for years to come. It was in that same year that, with the encouragement of her friend and famed author, James Baldwin, she wrote the first and most widely known of her memoirs, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Over the next several years, she would continue writing as well as composing and producing. She wrote books, poetry, TV scripts, everything you could imagine. One book of poetry, And Still I Rise, was published in 1978 and included another profound piece of poetry titled Still I Rise. The poem showcases the unshakable spirit of the Black community that is necessary to rise above the racism and adversity around them, and it is still highly relevant to this day. Maya Angelou was a truly amazing woman. In 1981, she became one of the few African American professors at Wake Forest University. She gained achievements and accolades for her work, one after the other. These included a Pulitzer, a Tony, 3 Grammys, and more than 50 honorary degrees. In 1993, she recited her poem, On the Pulse of Morning, at the inauguration of Bill Clinton. The recording of this poem won her one of the 3 Grammys. She again read a poem of her own called A Brave and Startling Truth at the commemoration for the 50th anniversary of the United Nations in 1995. She continued directing and collaborating with artists throughout the years. She even created her own line of Hallmark products in 2000. She was also the recipient of the 2000 Presidential Medal of Arts. Her 6th memoir, A Song Flung Up to Heaven, was completed in 2002. Maya continued to teach at Wake Forest University until 2011. This is also the year she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama. Maya Angelou was a force to be reckoned with up until her death on May 28, 2014, at the age of 86. She remains one of the most influential authors to date, and her mark on the world will never be forgotten. All in today with my favorite excerpt from Still I Rise that, to me, as an outsider who has so much to learn, embodies the strength and resiliency of the Black community in the face of hate and racism then and now. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. This attitude of going high when others go low and knowing your worth is one that more people, including myself, in this world should strive for. When I read this poem, it reminds me heavily of the parts in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, where Mama went high when others went low and they were racist towards her. And it shows how much of a positive influence she had on Maya as she grew into herself and beyond. Of her memoirs, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is the only one I've read, but like I mentioned in the beginning, it gave me so much more perspective. What Maya was going through personally at the time was not uncommon then and isn't uncommon now. Although the racism is not always as in your face now, it still exists. We are not so far removed from a time when segregation was law. So many people tend to treat it as if it was eons ago, but it was still alive and well when my parents were younger, and keep in mind, I'm only 27. With that in your mind, that is all I have for today. Thank you for joining me to take a look at the life of Maya Angelou. While I won't be talking about any other authors this month, I do have several other books that have really given me so much insight and allowed me to deepen my understanding of the perspective and struggles of the Black community, including the role that the government has played in perpetuating it. I'll leave a list of some of the books I've read and found most meaningful to me so far, and feel free to recommend any others you'd like. Again, thank you for joining me. I'll catch you later.